All right, welcome back for lesson three. We have three lessons left and we're done. So, we're going to talk about Reconstruction in Southern society and how Southern society is going to start changing because of Reconstruction. So, the vocab would be scalawag, carpetbagger, Ku Klux Klan, and sharecropper. So, before the Civil War, a small group of rich planters dominated politics in the South. And during Reconstruction, however, new groups tried to reshape Southern politics. And so there's going to be kind of three groups that are going to be more or less trying to change things for the better. And then there's going to be those that will try to resist the change. So the state governments created during radical Reconstruction were different from any government the South had known before. The old leaders had lost much of their influence, and the three groups would step in and replace them. And so the first group would be white Southern Republicans, and one group to emerge would consist of white Southerners who had supported the new Republican government. And many were business people who had opposed secession in 1860 and wanted to forget the war and get on with rebuilding the South. In other words, they want to get their lives back in order and they want to be able to make money again because they're businessmen. And many whites in the South felt that any Southerner who helped the Republicans was a traitor. And they called the white Southern Republicans scalawags, which is a word used for small and scruffy horses. So it wasn't really a good thing to be called that. And so another group would be Northerners. Many Northerners will come to the South after the war. And white Southerners accused the new arrivals of hoping to get rich from the South's misery. And then, well, some were actually trying to do that, but others were not. And so Southerners joked that these Northerners were in such a hurry to move south that they had time to only fling a few clothes in carpetbags, which are a type of cheap suitcase. And these Northerners then became known as carpetbaggers. And Northerners went to the South for various reasons. While a few did hope to profit as the South was rebuilt, many more were Union soldiers who had grown to love the South's rich land. So their group of them will be Union soldiers that, when they're fighting, they actually kind of liked the South and they saw opportunity here for them to become more and more successful. And others, both white and black, would be teachers, ministers, and reformers who wanted to help the freedmen succeed in their new lives. And African Americans were the third major new group in Southern politics. And before the war, they had no voice in government at all because, well, they were slaves and were viewed as property, not people. And during Reconstruction, they not only voted in large numbers, but they also ran for and were elected to public office, and they would become sheriffs, mayors, and legislators in the new state and local governments. And 16 African Americans were also elected to the U.S. Congress between 1869 and 1880, which is going to be huge for them. And two African Americans, both representing Mississippi, will serve in the Senate. First one would be in 1870 with Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was a clergyman and teacher, becoming the nation's first black senator. And he completed the unfinished term of former Confederate President Jefferson Davis. And in 1874, Blanche Kelso Bruce became the first African American elected to a full term in the Senate and served from 1875 to 1881. And Revels' election was an important victory for African Americans because he served on the Committee on Education and Labor, where he opposed attempts to segregate or separate schools for African Americans and whites. So he's going to be very, very influential on this. And freedmen did have less political influence than many whites claim they did, though, is something else you need to know. So, well, it did seem like they have quite a bit of political power and influence there. They really didn't have as much as some people claim they did. And so conservatives are also going to resist reform. So most white Southerners who held power before the Civil War resisted Reconstruction. They didn't want things to change. They wanted to stay powerful. And so these conservatives resented the changes imposed by Congress and that were enforced by the military then. And so conservatives were willing to let African Americans vote and hold a few offices, but they kind of were determined to keep the real power in the hands of whites. And so few wealthy planters will even try to force African Americans back onto plantations And many small farmers and laborers wanted the government to take action against freedmen who now competed with them for both land and power as well as even jobs. So these farmers and laborers aren't going to necessarily like the freed African Americans that much. And most of the conservatives were Democrats, and they declared war on anyone who cooperated with Republicans now. Um, and so that's going to be super important, especially when we start talking about the Ku Klux Klan. So some white Southerners formed secret societies to help them regain power. And so the most notorious of these secret societies would be the Ku Klux Klan or the KKK. And the Klan worked to keep African Americans and white Republicans out of office. Dressed in white robes and hoods to hide their identities, Klansmen would ride at night to homes of African American voters, shouting threats and burning wooden crosses. Um, and for the most part, this is where they stopped. Early on, they didn't really kill that many people. They were trying more or less to just more or less scare them out of voting and running for office. And when threats didn't work, the Klan would then actually turn to violence, and Klan members murdered hundreds of African Americans and their white allies. So, well, at first they would just threaten them and warn them and things like that. Eventually, they will start turning to violence to try to become more influential. And as they turn to violence, more and more people will become afraid of them. And many moderate Southerners condemned the Klan's violence, but most would do little to actually stop what they were doing. And freedmen would turn to the federal government for help now. But in 1870, Congress will make it a crime to use force to keep people from voting. So this is going to change things a little bit, but for the most part, Klan activities will decrease. However, the threat of violence will still always remain there. And some African Americans continue to vote and hold office, but others were now frightened away from the ballot box. And the easiest way to assert political dominance over a group of people is to get them to not vote. And by getting those people to not vote, they don't get to elect officials that represent them, and therefore they really don't get a lot of laws and legislation passed to help them. So this is where I'm going to leave you guys for today. Tomorrow we will be discussing problems with their slow political process and also economic problems in the South. So hopefully you guys have an enjoyable day, and we'll be back tomorrow.